Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Sylvia Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us. Speaking with Dr. Maria Paez. I'm your host, Sylvia Richardson. You know, in addition to obviously upholding treaty rights for indigenous people, but also unlearning racism, because I think a lot of the reasons why Venezuela can be robbed of $190 billion, in money. And you wrote in one of your articles was the equivalent of 25 years of social services for the people of Venezuela. It's because people just think that we somehow in Latin America don't have the capacity to elect good governance and to ordain our affairs in a way that will promote health and good way of life for all people in our nations. But the contrary is true.
Well, that's the EuroCentrism. You little brown people there, you little black people there, your cultures are worthless. They're no good. You have to do what we say because our cultures are better. Look how rich and prosperous we are, and look, you're poor because you don't even know what you're doing. I mean, we've heard this over and over again. Oh, the indigenous peoples are lazy. Oh, Mexicans are lazy. Oh, Latin Americans, they don't know how to organize, a tea party. I mean, we've heard this 100 million times. And what's the worst thing? The worst thing is the Latin Americans and indigenous people might end up believing this. This is all part of mind games to dominate us. Hegemony needs a certain authority. Authority is something that isn't power, let's say a physical power, but it's the feeling that you owe respect to them. This is when someone has authority. They're not making you do something, but they convince you that they are worth obeying. Well, I tell you one thing that has been eroded of the United States, and that is that sense of authority. If you look at history, you'd see that one of the main characteristics of an empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, the Roman Empire, is that they did give something to the countries that they subdued. They imposed what the first one that said this was Paz Romana. They imposed a certain peace. The Romans, their empire was the whole Mediterranean, okay, the north and the south of it. They stopped these countries from warring with each other, basically. They walked in with their terrible legions, massacred as much as they wanted to, but then afterwards they'd say, okay, you're the king of this country, fine. You'll be the king of the country. You continue being the king, but, you now have to pay tribute to us in Rome, okay? So that was Paz Romana. The same thing with the British in India. They stopped these different Maharajas from fighting each other, and they established some sort of peace. They were giving something. I'm not defending imperialism, but I'm just saying what the countries got from accepting this authority. Well, the United States, since the Second World War, the only thing that it has given to the world has been war. War. The only time that the United States was not physically, actively in war was during the presidency of Jimmy Carter. Apart from that, there has not been one moment in which the United States has not had war against other countries. Look at Guantanamo. What aberration is that? And this is a country that goes on about the rule of law, about democracy, about human rights. I have only one word to say to the United States, and that is Guantanamo. And all those horrible, evil, secret prisons that they have in the Middle East. And so the United States has eroded, well, then of course with their crazy president, Trump, uh, he he did the best job in sinking the majesty of the United States presidency. So they are not giving very much uh, peace. Their status in the world, people may not say it to their face, but they'll say it behind their back. They're gone. Second of all, their economy is quite frankly on the way down. And I don't say this myself. I'm not an economist, but I read what the economists are saying. And what is happening right now is that the countries that they have shunned and persecuted and maligned are now rising with a different international coin, which is not the dollar. So the dollar's position, unique position as uh, the money for the world is going down, and then you see their own social and political disaster. So they become very dangerous right now because they want very much a triumph. They want very much something to show the world that they can do what they have generally done, and they're not doing it because the countries are rising up. Venezuela is not alone. Venezuela is very much accompanied by the vast majority of the United Nations. And speaking of the United Nations, we have to protect the international law because it's the only thing that can protect the poorer countries.
How do we, as a social movement, cultivate that self authority, to learn to trust ourselves, to learn to trust that we can imagine and co create a different world where war is not the normal, where pandemics are not the new normal, where violence and this surveillance that now rules our lives is not the way of life. How do we begin to undo all that? Because you're right, we have to protect the international law. It's an imperfect way, but it's what we have right now. And yet, looking beyond the UN, looking beyond, the same tools of empire, the same instruments that have been used against us, how do we reimagine that world? Where do we start?
We're going to have to start with something that's going to hit us very, very hard, which is climate change. And in climate change, we don't need new fighter planes. We're going to need lots of helicopters that can land in different places very easily. These fighter planes that this government wants to buy are doing it only because the Americans want them to buy them. We don't need NATO. NATO, who's it defending us from? Just ask yourself. A pact of defense. It came up when there was, the Cold War. So NATO is defending us from what? That's another thing. And then the other thing is, we need in Canada, and I know Canadians don't want this, but we need a constitutional assembly because our structure for governance is not attuned to the new realities that we will be facing. We're facing challenges from the climate change. We are facing challenges from not this pandemic, but also others that can come. And we are facing challenges from the South, from the United States of America. Now people's eyes are being opened and realize, look, there are a bunch of crazy people in the United States who all have guns. And and they don't believe in their own government. They are challenging their own Supreme Court. They're challenging their judicial. They're challenging their executive. They don't believe Biden won the elections. I mean, these are all serious grietas, how can I say, breaks in the political structure of the United States. And what happens If it all goes to pot in the United States, do you think if they have riots and upheaval and heaven knows what in the United States, it's not going to affect us with this tremendous border that we do? Well, yes, we do. So we need to think about these things and ask for change. We need a change in the foreign policy. We need a change in which the indigenous peoples have a say in governance, both at the provincial and at the federal level. We need these new changes. We need changes to our electoral system. This first past the post. It doesn't have to be completely proportional representation. There are many ways in between in which we can get a more democratic system of education. And the last, but not least, the indigenous peoples are in the middle, as I say in my article, in a legal labyrinth. I don't even understand it. It's the Indian Act. It's the dual the dual authority that some of them have. It's the fact that they can't have a say in the development of their lands. It's their isolation from the rest of the body politic. I'm sure there are scholars out there who know a lot about indigenous laws, but me looking at it from the outside, I tell you it's a labyrinth. And this is a labyrinth which is very good because it's like a web that just tangles them up, So we have webs too. And one of the webs is the secrecy of federal ministries, particularly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has done so much damage to the relationship between Canada and Latin America. There's nothing I want more than a good relationship between this country and Latin America. And it should be. We have so much that we could, help each other and share and things that we have in common, such as indigenous peoples. I was invited to go, and I did go, to the first international symposium, or I think it was called conference, of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. I was so pleased. This was just a few weeks before the pandemic broke. And I went down to Caracas, and there I was with all the indigenous peoples representative from all of Latin America. And you know who was representing Canada? It was me. The indigenous people from Canada were not there. And then all of a sudden I said, no, hold on a minute. I can't represent the indigenous peoples. I'm not indigenous. I was very clear. I'm Canadian. You've invited me. I'm here. But, I can't speak for them. I can't say that I represent them or anything. But anyway, it was a marvelous, marvelous experience for me because the story and the burdens and struggles were all the same, from the Rio Grande down to Patagonia. One after the other, these delegates in their beautiful costumes and their headbands and their feathers in their head. So many of them were women, and it's the same struggle. We're all struggling against imperialism, against these rapacious corporations. We've got to change these laws that give corporations so much power. We've got to really realize that the rights of the indigenous peoples are also our rights. And unless we fight for their rights, we're not fighting for our rights either, because we're going to be flattened by that steamroller just the same as they are. So, and basically, we're in the same boat.
My father-in-law used to go swimming, and one day there was a kid who was kicked out of the pool for peeing in the pool. And my husband said, well, how do you know he was peeing in the pool? He says, because everybody could see it. and I thought about, you can't have a peeing corner in a pool. And it's the same with justice. We can't have a little place where we just let all the injustice happen and everyone else is just fine. As long as we allow injustice for indigenous people, we're going to live with injustice for
Yep.
us. And in many ways, we're going to continuously experience violence. There are so many laws that have been imposed, isolation mandates, shutting down of cities. And yet, I see a lot of big corporations were never in any way harmed, right? Like Walmart was open the whole time, Costco was open. None of the big ones were forced to close down. And yet the mom and pop stores that have, could have easily limited the number of people that entered their stores at a time were forced to close down. And so I think it's important to recognize, right, the abusive power that has been used and how this surveillance continues, perhaps post pandemic, is important also to notice. In Latin America, we see that once they put in certain regulations, they're not coming down. They told us about the war on drugs, which really was the criminalization of activists in Latin America during the 80s. It had nothing to do with drugs. The drugs are usually moving to the States, which is its biggest consumer. But the war on drugs was a very useful tool for empire to mobilize, militarize our streets, and so understanding the lessons we have learned from hegemony, from empire, from being subjects of empire, and I think it's a good time for us to not only awaken to those things that we have lived in our bodies. Our bodies are wise. They know, they remember things, even though our brain sometimes freezes and shuts down because it's too much. We're overwhelmed from all the things we've seen and experienced. It's important to recognize that we can realign our nervous system by being in community with others. And perhaps I think that's what Venezuela has been a good example of, is the way the community there has sustained their struggle for sovereignty, their struggle for, creating a new social system that will allow
Yep.
all its people to survive, and not just to survive, but to thrive, because we've been in survival mode for too long. You listen to Latin Waves. To support our work, please visit LatinWavesMedia.com and consider becoming a member for as little as $1 per month. Thank you for listening.
No, it's a different country altogether from what it was, and we will prevail. That's all I can tell you, because we have prevailed in the middle of horrendous persecution and horrendous pandemic, and the basis of the solidarity that the Venezuelan Bolivarian revolution does with its own people has been the backbone. Nobody can feel alone in Venezuela right now, because there are so many ways in which people are connected. That's really why the country has not collapsed.
As you move through different circles of students and community gatherings, what have you learned is the resistance? Because I think sometimes it's a resistance to acknowledge, right, our own complicitness sometimes. In many ways, I think education means just being able to unlearn as well as learn new things. It's being able to cultivate imagination, being able to co-create with others a different path forward. What do you feel are some of the lessons we have learned from this chapter, in our revolutionary history in Latin America?
One thing we have learned for sure is that we have to help ourselves, and the communities have to help themselves, and the grassroots are part of that. That the army alone can't defend ourselves, that we've got the militias which is the eyes and ears and help of the communities who are helping to defend ourselves. That the agriculturalist alone can't deliver the food, that they need the communal councils and the communes to sow the fields and to transport the food to those who need it. The medical services, we needed the Cubans to come and help us and to teach our students how to be real good community doctors. You know how in 1 year over 2 million Venezuelans learned how to read and write? It wasn't that we had 2 million teachers teaching them. It was to organize in each community with the manuals and the videos so that those who could read and write taught those who couldn't. So it was the people teaching the people how to read and write. There's no illiterates in Venezuela right now, except it's less than 1% those people who are mentally ill that that can't do it. This is the UN, the UNESCO saying there is no illiteracy in Venezuela. It was the people who knew how to read and write with the Cuban method taught their neighbors how to read and write. They didn't have to go to a special school after work when they were tired. It was in their own community. They'd go to the house of their neighbor who could read and write, and the neighbor would put on this video, and the neighbor had the books and whatever, and it was the neighbor who could read and write who taught all the other neighbors. And this happened all over the country. So what did we learn with the Bolivarian Revolution? That we help ourselves, that we help each other if we're organized. If we are organized, and it took the Bolivarian Revolution to organize this. What did we see just a year ago in May? How these mercenaries from Colombia wanted to attack Venezuela through the coast, and it was the coastal fishermen, the humble fishermen of the coast that caught them. So these are the kind of things that Venezuela has learned: how to be resilient, how to be strong, and because the United States has been so vile to us, there's no question that we are fighting an external enemy. And the people inside Venezuela, who are the upper class, who are in cahoots with these people on the outside, well, they have no political future. They know that they will never be elected, that they have been in the wrong side of history. And so I think that the Bolivarian Revolution is going to do very well in the next election, which is in November, where they're going to elect governors and mayors in the country, and you will see it there because the people are very wise.
As a society, we also are part of a global community. And what is your call for the global community and the people who are in support of the revolution in Venezuela?
Well, it's very important because the struggle of Venezuela is a universal struggle. It is not a localized struggle. It is a struggle for peace. It is a struggle for international law. It is a struggle for liberty. And I will repeat this because I've said this before. The history of the 20th century would have been different if when the Republic of Spain was fighting against the fascists, and I mean real fascists in Spain who were united with the Nazis, right? And they overthrew the Republic of Spain. You had individual volunteers. We had a brigade here, the Bethune Brigade, and we had the International Brigade that went to Spain to try and help. But the countries did not help the Republic, the actual legal, democratically elected Republic of Spain. And it emboldened the Nazis, because what did the Nazis do? They used the civil war in Spain as a litmus test. They used their planes and dropped the bombs that they were going to bomb Europe with afterwards. They destroyed the Spanish Republic, and what did the brains of the Nazis said? You see, the rest of the world were cowards. They let us take over Spain. It's going to be a piece of cake to take over Europe because they're all cowards and they're not going to oppose us. And so the hordes of the Nazis went into Poland and Czechoslovakia and Paris and did all the horrible things that they did in the Holocaust because the litmus test was Spain. Well, let me tell you, the litmus test today is Venezuela. And if we allow these devils of war in Washington, these malicious people who believe in torture and bombs and lies, overturn the Venezuelan revolution, then there will be no hope. So I tell the rest of the world, I tell this global, people, just like it's happening to Venezuela, it could happen to you unless you put a stop to this vicious fascism that we see right now that is growing every day more and more in the United States and within Europe also. So the struggle of Venezuela is not the struggle of this little, insignificant little country in Latin America. It is the struggle for peace. It is the struggle for justice, okay? And it is the struggle for liberty. And we will pay a huge price collectively if they do not support Venezuelan people today. And that goes for Canada too. So it's been great talking to you.
It's such an amazing...
I always feel honored when you call me, and we always have such great conversations. It goes all over the place, but that's the way good conversations go.
Thank you so much for all your work, for all the ways that you keep us remembering, our own power, really, because I think your call to people to realize that we have to help ourselves in order to create the world we want to live in, and that means take responsibility for the places where we are compromised, and unlearn, decolonize, the colonizers' way of being, and to relearn, right, our own beauty, our own ability to create peace, to create...
Well, your work on the media is absolutely essential. We need your media. We need your radio station. We need this space that is so denied us to be able to talk about these things that others do not want to listen to. So I thank you most profoundly, Sylvia, and especially I thank you for your great solidarity. Thank you so much for calling me.
Thank you. Thank you again for being with us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an independently produced syndicated radio program made available for free to campus and community radios, and also to the world at latinwavesmedia.com. Please visit the website to hear previous shows, hear about upcoming events, and consider becoming a member for as little as $1 per month.